Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menasce. On today's show, I'm going to answer a question that I've received from several of our listeners in recent weeks. I'm not going to attribute the question to any one person. The basic gist of the question is, how do you do it? How do you come up with so much highly varied content on a daily basis? A lot of content has been clearly researched and was not just off-the-cuff verbal opinion. So the basic question is, how do I come up with this wide array of content? Well, today's episode is episode number 1453 since the start of the podcast. The podcast is a creative endeavor. A lot of people think about creating content. Some people have a blog or write articles, or maybe they interview someone on camera, or perhaps for a podcast. But each time you contemplate creating a piece of creative material, a decision's involved. When will you find the time to create that new article or video? Then you need to decide, what are you going to create? How long is it going to be? What's the point of the article? Lots of decisions. And since I produce a daily show, I don't have to worry about knowing when the next episode is coming out. In my case, I know I'll be producing something new every day. That's not a complicated decision. I also know that a 5-minute episode is approximately 850 words. So I also know how long it's going to take me to come up with that content. I also know I'm going to make one major point with each episode, not 5. If I give you 5 things to remember, you're not going to remember them anyway. I'm going to give you one meaningful thing to think about every day. In order to keep the show fresh, I need variety. To do that, I break the content into different types. Number 1, there's evergreen content that is timeless in nature. Number 2, there are news tie-ins. This is where something trending in the news is going to be of interest to the listeners, and I'm going to give a slightly different slant on something that would otherwise be reported in the mainstream news media. Number 3, there's the book of the month. In order to be considered for Book of the Month, the book has to meet a very simple criteria. It's got to be impactful enough that it will either change your life or your perspective on the world. Number 4, topics related to business ownership or entrepreneurship. Number 5, strategies for investment. Number 6, listener questions. I love to answer your questions, and we've got some great questions coming in from many of you. Number 7, observations that I've made from our own journey. And number 8, of course, interviews with notable people from the world of investing. All of these different types of content are available for me to choose from. And I know that my listeners are sophisticated investors. They're folks like me. When I create content, I'm speaking to people like me, and therefore, there's a good chance that you, the listener, will be interested as well. If after a while, the content isn't resonating or maybe is repetitive, then those folks will probably drift away and subscribe to another show, and that's perfectly okay. My content is not of interest to them, and that's perfectly fine. My commitment is to produce a piece of quality content each and every day for you, our listener. I go through significant effort to curate the content and make sure it's fresh. That requires planning and research and lots of writing. We see lots of projects in our business, and that generates a lot of ideas for shows. We see things that frankly boggle the mind. The full spectrum of human behavior is also present in the world of real estate investing. Things that never should happen, well, they show up with alarming regularity. We see commercial tenants refusing to pay rent. We see sellers misrepresenting facts on a project. We see sellers sneaking in changes in the addendum of a contract, hoping the buyer won't notice. We see people agreeing to one thing and then doing another. And then we see government agencies making up the rules as they go along. We see owners make representations based on how they think things are supposed to work in their own mind, rather than how the laws are actually written. All of the crazy things that might make for a good reality TV show could actually be interesting content for a podcast. And reporting on our observations makes for some pretty interesting stories. We'll have a bunch more of those in the coming weeks. The research departments of the major commercial brokerage houses and the major lenders also have very useful reports that will be of interest to you, our listener. We've got a specific way of looking at deals that isn't, I won't say it's unique, but it's maybe not the norm. So when we report on the findings of the market reports, we get to interpret those reports through the lens of how we evaluate projects. And then as always, successful real estate projects depend on 3 factors. Number 1, picking the right asset class in the right submarket. Number 2, having the right team. And number 3, the specifics of the deal. And these 3 simple principles create a meaningful framework for discussing submarkets, team management, and deal structuring. Lots of great topics can emanate from that simple framework. I'm not here to convince the listeners of a particular point of view. If you search the blogosphere or the podcast world, you'll find no shortage of opinionated podcasters and news reporters, for that matter, with an agenda. But I'm not here to sway your opinion. I'm here presenting a thought process, sharing my observations, and then encouraging you to do your own investigation and see if you come up with the same conclusions. So as you can see, coming up with a rich array of content, now over 1,450 episodes, with virtually no repetition, is not that hard. But it does require creating with intention. As you think about that, have an awesome rest of your day. Go create some content of your own, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.